There can't be many departments with a bigger remit than human resources. But what effect has the pandemic had on the profession? As our podcast is all about leadership, today we're taking a deeper dive into the world of HR and leadership, inclusion and diversity. Our guest today is Mukta Arya, a seasoned HR leader with over 25 years of experience as a strategic partner in various industries across Asia. Mukta, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to think, where do you join us from today?
Hi, Dan. I'm very happy to be here. I'm joining from Hong Kong and in my office, as you can see, the colorful pictures behind me.
Yeah, we were commenting just before we started of how what a lovely wall to have in your office of all your team, I believe. So it's a great montage to those folks. I'm going to start with our first question, which we've been asking all of our guests on this podcast, which is somewhat of a little bit of a challenge, where we ask people to tell us about yourselves in 60 seconds.
So I consider myself a global citizen who has lived only in Asia, but in different countries. Somebody who changed careers, studied biotech, but then ended up in human resources and still love it. So this is my introduction.
Well, that was very brief, and I think you're the first person to properly get that underneath 60 seconds. So thank you. So let's explore that a little bit more. So you've worked in, as you mentioned, in HR for 25 years, and I guess and the main theme of our episode today is about the kind of pandemic and the effects that's had, and the constant changing nature of work. So, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing HR professionals today, and how do you think that they can be addressed?
The challenges for HR professionals, they have been there for from the time immemorial. At least when I started my career in human resources, the challenges of really attracting the right talent, retaining them. I think it's still there because again the focus is on the right one, whether you can really have the right fit, and it's never easy. There's always so many things which are going on in the mind when we are looking at people with globalization, with people moving everywhere. It also becomes a little bit more difficult because people are moving. It's much easier for employees to move around, relocate, get jobs somewhere else, or
Hmm.
have double nationality, citizenship, permanent residency, whatever. So it does, the movement of talent across the world also has implication for us because it's easier for people to move.
Hmm.
So really attracting and retaining the right talent is has a different dimension now than, of course, compared to what we had 20 years ago. It's a
Hmm.
different challenge, but it is still there. Okay, so this is what I would think. The other challenge which I feel is with the four generations that are working together, how to really engage all of them, because we now cannot have one solution for all the problems that we have which are intergenerational. Different generations, they like to do things differently. They like to do
Hmm.
different things in their own way. So how do you have programs, how do you have benefits which are basically appealing to these four generations? So I think that's another one for me. The third one, which is again, on the inclusion part, not so much of diversity, which is still there, by the way, if you look at gender and cultural diversity in some organization, but the bigger one is also of inclusion, of really where people, inclusion is still something which is, it is moving on, but it is still not there. I mean, it is still an issue that people are talking about it, and this
Hmm.
is something which I feel that will still take a long time, because we take sometimes two steps forward and one step backwards, or one step forward
Hmm.
and two steps backwards. So we really need to work on it consistently, and it is tiring. It's not easy. And finally, I think what I feel for us in HR is that as human resource people, professionals, we are human beings ourselves. We are employees ourselves. So there's a lot more emotional baggage, or lot more emotional content that we have to face in our jobs, which is for employees, but also for ourselves, with things which are changing. Hybrid working, many different things which are happening, overload of information, and multiple priorities with lean teams. I think it's also a question of how do we make ourselves rejuvenated to really
Mm.
help the organizations that we are working in. So for me, these are the challenges that I feel which are really there right now. There are many more, but these are the, I think, the topmost for me.
Yeah, and you're right. It's still a common challenge to have. Particularly, I wanted to talk about the sort of diversity and inclusion piece that you
Mhm.
mentioned there, and more recently, the acronym has the DNI acronym has evolved even further with the additions of equity and belonging. So now
Yes,
we've got the acronym of DEIB. And so
yes.
I wanted to ask, what are the benefits of creating a culture of belonging, and how can leaders promote that sense of belonging amongst their employees?
I feel sense of belonging is frankly the true essence of any organization. If you do not have a sense of belonging, then we are just working for many different entities, and there's no attachment, there's no loyalty. Now
Mm,
again, when I say loyalty, attachment, I know that in today's world, there are companies where people can work today, but then tomorrow you don't know if it is acquired by somebody else, or people are made redundant. It's pretty normal nowadays. So
mm,
these kind of things, people feel that has no value. However, I feel that for an organization, like for example for Societe Generale, when we have people, if they have some sense of belonging, then at least the contribution that they make has much more meaning.
mm,
Otherwise it's a transaction. Okay. So as human beings, we do like to have that sense of belonging, and we have seen that that employees do want to have, for example, simple things like an office where they can come. Not everybody wants to work remotely 100%. They still want to have that attachment to where we have our office. There's a logo. You have office merchandise, which has some value. Still people like to have merchandise which has the office logo. So
yeah,
belongingness is also, I'm belonging to a team. Uh, I'm part of a team. I'm part of a company which has a vision, etc. I sense it much more now because I've been in the bank for 17 years. And I know that when I see the logo of my bank, when I go to Paris and you see the Societe Generale logo everywhere because it's a retail bank there,
mm,
the sense of pride is immense. I take pictures with it and post it on my social media accounts, etc. So I think if that feeling is not there, then frankly, if we have to, if we are tempted by say another job, it's much easier to leave. But if you like the people you work with, if you feel some sort of affinity, with your manager or with the people in your organization, then you will stick around. The
yeah,
stickiness will be there. It's like brand loyalty. It's the same thing. So for me, it's a
yeah.
very important point here.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I think that even something simple like uh, having your picture taken and having it on the wall of the of it's, I think that there's it's such a nice touch to, as you say, feel included and feel that you belong, because you it's just that human quality, isn't it, of that
Yeah.
sense of belonging. The I wanted to move on to your journey as a leader, and as a female leader, and women in leadership is a development area our clients often talk to us about.
Mhm.
The stats show us that the proportion of women in senior roles is growing, but slowly, and generally less than a third of top positions in organizations. So as somebody who works in a global organization, do you see different challenges on different continents? Are there navigational challenges that can be managed in the same way?
Cultures do play an important role, in whatever we do. I have worked only in Asia Pacific, but when I see my counterparts in Europe as well as in UK or in Americas, it's similar. The gender diversity, for example, what you're
Mm,
talking about at senior level, it definitely is an issue. But it's also coming from the industry that we are in, which is financial services, and investment banking particularly. You would see that, and it's systemic. It's not just because the organizations, as an organization, we are not doing enough to have it. It's systemic. How many women, for example, take STEM courses, and then when you grow into the career, then what happens, and how many really reach that kind of a level. So there are issues which are there, and I think they are widespread, they are universal. It's not, it is dependent on culture. So for example, within APAC, if I look at it, we are present in around 12 markets. And in China and Taiwan, for example, we see large number of females in senior positions. Whereas if I go to Japan and Korea, the number reduces.
Right.
Singapore and Hong Kong will be somewhere in the middle. So it does also depend on the societal norms. Where what is the position of women in that society. That is important. But generally, we see that the gender issue is definitely there at senior levels across the world. Yeah, it's not only
Mm,
here. It could be different things in Asia. It is also because women are the primary caregivers, or when they have babies, they have to take care of it. They're the primary ones, which are there. And then in some countries where you have house help, for example, in certain countries, if you have
mm,
house help, then women have more opportunities to work, and they can go out and do their jobs
mm,
at different levels, at higher levels where the demand is much higher. Whereas in countries where you don't have house help, it also impacts the way women can work. And we have seen it in different countries in APAC. In Hong Kong, Singapore, you have house help, so it's much easier.
mm,
But then in other locations, you do not have. So it does impact the number of women in the workforce. Now, again, it's not one or two, it's multiple things which are there. We have to take into account all those kind of things, but we are still positive that we will work on the gender diversity issue that
mm,
we have and try to raise the number of senior women. It's not easy because, again, it's not one or two things. It is systemic, it is cultural, it is societal norms. There are many things which come into the play when we have to look at gender diversity.
mm.
For example, yeah.
And yeah, the sort of raising of a family is a crucial one in that, isn't it? Because we still got, I suppose, traditional ways of bringing up kids, uh, and that yeah, that those and but it's I guess it's building that culture in the organization that can make a
Mhm.
massive difference to how women coming back to work after having
Yeah.
children can be reintegrated into the organization and continue on their career. So
Support
it's
yeah, you're right. I think support system is very important, and
mm,
the organizations who have policies, or for example parental coaching,
mm,
who have, for example, flexible working hour, or managers who really understand these kind
yeah,
of issues that, for example, parents may face, whether it's male or female. Parents may face when they come back to work after a childbirth or adoption, etc.
yeah,
I think it's very important to have that kind of a mindset and the support system around. If it's not there, then it makes it difficult for employees to be more productive, if their mind is on something else. If
yeah,
I have a mother who is coming back, from maternity, and always looking at the baby cam, because this is what is top of her mind, and which is correct. I mean, she should do that, because if it was my child, I will do the same.
yeah, yeah,
But as a manager, if I do not understand why she is in that state of mind, and basically, do not think about the concerns that she have and adjust accordingly, then it's going to be a problem. So
mm,
that's why for me it's also quite important that, apart from the policies that the organizations have to support all family care kind of issues, managers also need to understand and have the mindset that these kind of things will happen, and
yeah.
how do we actually take care of them, so that everybody benefits.
Well, and I suppose one potential positive out of the pandemic is the kind of, I guess, the more flexible working, whether it's hours or location.
Yes.
I've myself, so our family grew by one in the August of
Mhm.
2020. So we did have to find ways of navigating around childcare and looking after a child, especially during the lockdowns and things like that, and navigating work with that as well. So it's yeah, I suppose, but the kind of silver lining, I suppose, if you work well, if you can work for an organization where it does allow that flexibility to be able to either work somewhere different if you need to work somewhere different, or in order to kind of manage that time and and look after the people that are closest to you, then you can do so. Yes, if that is an action that can always be taken. I'd like to look at one of a statistic that we looked at recently. So we did a survey, impacted a survey recently where we did a poll with over 500 global CEOs and senior executives, and what a statistic that came out of that was that only 25% of the responses came back saying that their organization encourages people to be themselves in the workplace. So to reiterate that, only 28 20, I'll start that again. Only 25% said that their
Mm.
organization encourages people to be themselves, which of course means that 75% are admitting that they don't. So I
Yes.
suppose who owns responsibility for this? And many initiatives seem to stem from HR, but in your experience, what best practice have you seen around DEIB, and how can individuals make a change in the workplace? What steps can they take to
Mm.
be allies for underrepresented groups?
For me, DEI is everybody's responsibility. However, to make when you are starting out in an organization, all these initiatives about DEI, it has to come from the top. It's extremely important. The top has to set the tone
Mm,
for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Because if we do not, for example, have a framework, if we do not have things which are spelt out to all the managers, all the employees, why do we have a DEI strategy? What do we want to achieve from it? And if the senior managers are not walking the talk, it does not cascade down. Yeah.
yeah.
Then, if, for example, if I, as a senior manager, if I am not inclusive enough, or I am making discriminatory comments, people down the line in my team, are going to say that, okay, if my manager is making these kind of remarks, then that means it's allowed, so I'm allowed to do it, and then it doesn't work. So for me, the start has to be, it has to be the top has to walk the talk,
Mm,
and then we have to make sure that we have employee champions and all the managers who also walk the talk. Because if the proximity managers are not taking actions, or not really being the role model, for all the DNI philosophy that we have, then again it doesn't work. So for me, it's a very delicate thing. It has to be done by everybody.
mm,
So how everybody can do it, and it's very easy to say everybody should do it. We have to then make sure that all these DNI activities are embedded in our day-to-day HR policies. Promotion, if you are looking at gender diversity, cultural diversity, make sure that you look at the number of nominations, and make sure that you have gender diversity and cultural diversity. When you have your restroom, for example, simple things like that, do you have restrooms for all the different genders? For example, we have or do you have a gender neutral bathroom? Do you have signs for all these things so that people feel more inclusive? When you look at your policies, are we using inclusive language? Instead of using he and she, are we using they? Are we mindful when we are talking, to our employees? Are we using the same kind of inclusive language, which, for example, does not discriminate somebody? And of course, what we are not trying to do is telling people that you please come out and tell us, what your orientation is, etc. The aim is that when we use all these kind of things, people feel inclusive. They don't have to come out, but they feel that they are included, in a way.
sure.
So when you have benefits, do you have benefits for heterosexual group, but also all the LGBT plus Q, those kind of things which are there? Are
Mm,
you really taking care of all that? Now again, it's the policies which are documented, which are in black and white, which gives comfort to the people. So we have to make sure that, first of all, we are walking the talk, as managers of the organization, but also we have policies in place which is in black and white, so that it's not just motherhood statements, it's something
mm.
which is down there in action. So it's a number of things that have to do, but everybody has to be involved in it in stages. We started our Diversity and Inclusion Council in 2015 with all the top managers in the region. They were part of the council.
Mm.
We started with them. Then we had our employee resource groups with the chairpersons, and each of the sponsor was from the management committee. So we continued that, and then we have now employee champions. We have to make sure that at every step we are supporting the employee champions or the ERGs when they are coming up with some ideas to implement. Are we really making sure that when people have any concern, do we look at it? I think listening to employees is also very important, and really putting it in action is also very important. We can't do everything, but can we, for example, out of the 10 ideas that are there, can we implement two or three, because of course there are a lot of considerations which are there. It's a continuous effort, it's a tireless effort, it is something which we have to do with perseverance, and we cannot lose steam. So that's why, for me, I find this topic very interesting, but it is extremely challenging to make progress. But if
And
you do it time, sorry.
would you say that how fast do you think things are changing, and are things changing fast enough in that for positive change? Do you think it's happening fast enough, or is it still? Are you in your experience, are you still seeing it as a problem that needs addressing?
It is not fast enough,
Mm.
because for example, when you want to change, say, in your top management, you want to change the percentage of females, okay, from even 1% or 2% or 3%. It takes time, because the decisions are made on many things. You just can't put somebody in that position because they are of a different gender, you see.
Sure.
You have to see the suitability, you have to see the business rationale, you have to see whether the business will benefit, because we are not a we are a for-profit organization. We also need to make money, so you need to take into account many different things before you can take action. It takes time.
Mm.
It's not going to happen overnight, frankly. I mean, that is something which is unreasonable to think, but it is still very slow. Organizations are making an effort, there are quotas, people are pushing for things and all, but I do see the pace will take some time, to really be equal, unless you take some drastic actions which may disrupt a number of things. It's not going to happen. Yeah, I don't see the pace to be fast enough.
Mm.
It's still in time. Yeah.
Well, we were impressed by some of the statistics on Société Générale's homepage,
Uh-huh.
which were we noticed that you operate in 66 countries with a staff roll call from 154 nationalities. So
Yes.
how do you ensure that your people strategies are effectively implemented across such a diverse range of cultures and geographies?
So for us, we have, of course, like America is US is responsible for the North, South, and Canada. You have Europe, and you have others. So we have HR, which is a global HR. Then we have the business lines HR, which is there. So we try to make sure at least that we have a common goal, at a group level. And then, like for example, for me in Asia Pacific, I will have elements from our global strategy, in our Asia Pacific thing. But we also have to look at what the local specificities are in different countries. Now, my role is definitely to make sure that there's an alignment between the two. So what
Mm.
we call local, global, but also local. It's not easy. It's sometimes there are conflicts. Sometimes you have duplication. Those kind of things happen. But it is, for example, my role and the role of my counterparts to make sure that we are able to handle things where we give the global touch, and give that global feeling to the employees that they're part of a global organization, but that we are also taking care of it when they are in a specific market.
Mm.
So the balance, it is not easy, but yeah, we have been able to do it. We still have, as you said, a lot of diversity. What we are working on is a major part on the inclusion part here.
So yeah, I wanted to ask you about any challenges that you've maybe encountered throughout your career, and what did you maybe do to kind of navigate those challenges, and what did you learn from them in order to kind of help you develop to face further challenges down the line?
Many challenges. It's like challenges related to when you have to, say, for example, close a business and then let people go. I remember it was very early in my career. I was quite young in my 20s, and we had to do that. And I couldn't sleep the entire night because I was like, oh my God. And it was the worst time. It was 9/11.
Okay.
That is where the jobs were. Uh, and at that time, redundancy was not seen as something which is normal.
Mm,
So yeah, I could not sleep the entire time. But it also helped me to really understand that businesses have ups and downs. And as human resource professional, one of the most important thing that we need to have is resilience without losing the human touch.
mm,
I don't have to be cold hearted. I still feel the pain. But if there are certain things which we have to do because of the organization and it makes sense for the organization, then we go ahead and do it,
mm,
even though we feel for the people. And what we do and what I learned from that is that during the tough time, how more we can help people. So even if there's a redundancy, but how can we help people to find something else, connect them with people? There's still things we can do, to really help them find a new life, because life doesn't stop. There are other things which are there beyond life. People move on. But how we can be human when we are, for example, when people are going through tough times. So I think that was quite early in my career I learned, and it has remained with me forever. And that's what I tell my team, that okay, there could be good times and bad times, but can we be still be human? We don't have to be
mm.
cold hearted
No,
when
that's it.
these kind of things happen. So that was one of the things. The second was about decisions and the courage to accept that there are certain decisions may not be right, that we took the wrong decision. In the beginning, I used to feel pretty bad when we hire somebody, who has not turned out to be good, or and then everybody says that, oh, but you were involved in the decision making. So I would feel
Mm,
really bad and feel like guilty kind of thing. But then I realized that, in life, everybody, all of us, and we are human beings, we can only try, we can't predict. I mean, we are not god, and predict what is going to happen. Sometimes
mm,
decision can be made which are not right, but I think the important thing is to really to have the courage to say that yes, I did make that decision. It went wrong. What can we do to come out of it and rectify it, because what has happened in the past. Let's just move ahead. And I think
yeah.
this has really helped me, because it happens. I have a team. There are people who will make mistake. I will make mistake. But can we just stop beating ourselves up over what has gone wrong? And instead of that, can we just move ahead and not make that mistake again? Because if we make the same mistake again, it's not a mistake, anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that is something which I have learned. The third, what I have also learned is the value of really not keeping grudges, because sometimes it may happen. And in my profession in HR, if you keep grudges, it may really impact the way you think objectively, about people. What I have learned over time is not to keep grudges. If something has happened in your past with some employees or somebody else, and they have and you are quite negative about it, let it go and not take it into your decision making. Basically, if somebody has done something to you which is not very positive, the best thing is really learn to forgive them. It's not easy, but learn to forgive them and move on, and don't hold it against them, because you will be involved in some decision making
Mm,
regarding them. Well, but it doesn't help anybody. It only hurts ourselves. So those kind of things which are very personal, frankly, but it has really helped me in my career, and I feel that I'm maybe a much better person, after, I would say, after going through all those little kind of trials,
yeah.
things which were really making me very upset at one point of time. I really, now when I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking at that point of time? Why did I
Sure.
give myself so much trouble? But again, it comes with time. I don't think you can
Absolutely.
learn everything. Yeah.
Well, we finish our podcast episodes with by asking the same question to all of our guests, which, and you've kind of already answered it, which is that if you were to start your career again, what would be the best piece of advice after everything you've learned? What would be the best piece of advice that you would give your younger self? But you've kind of already answered that. But if you've got anything else to add, please do so.
No, I think the only advice I will, in addition to what I said, is that basically, enjoy your life. It's too short. There are such beautiful things in this world. Work is only one part of our life. We should not be wasting our energies on the small things, that we spend time on the emails that we didn't like, the tone of somebody, etc., etc. Plenty of things to do. So go out and smell the roses. That's what I will say.
Ah, what a great way to finish. Thank you very much. Well, thank you again, Mukta, for joining us today and taking time out of your busy day and busy schedule. And that just really leaves me to say that if you'd like to find out more about Impact, or of course, if you'd like to connect with myself or Mukta on LinkedIn, then you'll find all the links that you need in the description. So thank you ever so much for joining me. And until the next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.